and thank you, IRF Summit, for giving me the opportunity to tell you my story. My name is Grace Jin Drexel, and on October 10th, my father, Pastor Ezra Jin, was arrested by the Chinese authority along with 27 other pastors and church leaders from Zion Church. 18 total remain in prison today. This crackdown represents one of the largest takedown of an independent Christian congregation in China since the Cultural Revolution, a sweep so brazen it has drawn international condemnation, including from Secretary of State Marco Rubio. To understand why my father is in prison, you must understand that China, under Chairman Xi Jinping, has embarked on a systematic campaign to achieve total state control over religious life through what the government calls Sinicization of religion, officially framed as making the religion more Chinese. Let me be clear, Sinicization is not about making religion more Chinese. It is repression, plain and simple. Christians in China has been Chinese for generations. We have used Chinese Bibles, sing indigenous hymns, and we develop our own theological tradition. But beginning in 2018, a wave of persecution and crackdown on all religious life began under the auspices of Sinicization. It included removing crosses and replacing them with portraits of Xi Jinping, replacing hymns with revolutionary party songs, rewriting sermons to align with socialist core values, installing facial recognition cameras inside the sanctuary, and shutting down or even leveling churches. This crackdown also targeted Muslims, especially Uyghurs in Western China, Buddhist, Taoist, and other religious groups. In 2018, Zion Church became a target specifically because the church leadership refused the government's demand to install 23 facial recognition cameras inside its sanctuary. In response, the government brutally seized the church buildings and imposed an exit ban on my father, forbidding him from leaving the country. Yet even repression cannot extinguish faith. My father and his congregation did not give up in the face of these actions. They developed a hybrid online-offline model. And beyond anyone's wildest imagination, when COVID hit in 2020 and all gatherings were forced to a halt, Zion Church's online model allowed church gatherings to explode and expand nationwide, launching 100 new church meeting spaces across 40 cities all across China. The church grew to its largest size ever, often attracting 10,000 individuals daily. Now, a new and more severe persecution is underway. The church leadership arrested in recent months are not arrested and punished because they are political, but because they seek to worship freely. We hear reports that they are made to sleep on mats on the floor in the cold, and they are subject to sleep deprivation and endless interrogation as punishment. Many of them, including my father, have severe health concerns and grow worse under harsh prison conditions. I have not seen my beloved father in person in 7 years. He was not there at my wedding to walk me down the aisle, and he has never met his grandchildren. And though I hold on to hope, I know the grim reality that many prisoners of the Chinese government will never see their families again. Since I began advocating for my father and the release of other detained church leaders, my family has also experienced transnational repression, and that we have been targeted by the Chinese government abroad. We have received threatening phone calls, and I have been watched and followed in Washington, D.C. I am sometimes fearful. After all, I'm seeking to expose and hold account the second most powerful nation in the world. Yet as a Christian, I believe that we are asked to take courage and to speak truth, and that the God who created heaven and earth will stand by our side. Similarly, I urge all of you here today to take courage, to use your voice and influence in whatever sphere to speak the name of my father, Pastor Ezra Jin, and many other church leaders who have been unjustly imprisoned. Call for the Chinese government to release all Zion Church members immediately and unconditionally, along with other religious prisoners of conscience. Do not accept China's trampling of universal human rights with silence. If left unchecked, Beijing's wave of repression will reverberate around the world. As a Christian, I also believe in miracles. I draw strength in knowing that my God is a good God, and that even these bleakest moments might be used to serve a greater purpose. Our prayers are not in vain. As my dad wrote in a letter from prison, God has indeed used his power to uphold us. I believe that God is also testing us during this time, like refining silver, painful but full of love. God will not abandon us. Thank you. And now please join me in watching a special message from a great champion for the cause of religious freedom and on behalf of prisoners of conscience from around the world, former President George W. Bush. Thank you.
Good evening to everyone at the 2026 International Religious Freedom Summit. As you gather tonight, Americans are preparing to celebrate 250 years as a nation. The freedom to worship, according to one's heart, is enshrined in our Constitution because our founders knew it was so central to human dignity. Sadly, far too many people around the world still live without this freedom. Many worship in secret. Some languish in prison simply for exercising that core human right. Tonight, Laura and I join you in standing in solidarity with those oppressed for their beliefs. We applaud the work you are doing in securing the release of those wrongly detained, and we pray for a day when your work will no longer be needed. God bless you all.
Welcome to the stage, our panel for How Religious Freedom Impacts Global Security. Moderator, former National Security Council Senior Advisor on International Religious Freedom, Sarah Macon. Senior Advisor, Human Rights First, Scott Busby. David and Kelly Pfeil Fellow, George W. Bush Presidential Center, Nicole Bibbins Sedaca. And Principal Advisor for Global Religious Freedom, U.S. State Department, Mark Walker.
Good afternoon, distinguished panelists, guests, advocates, friends, all of you here gathered. We're grateful for this opportunity to open this plenary session to discuss one of the most vital, yet often underappreciated connections in foreign policy, the nexus between religious freedom and global stability. We live in a world where conflicts, whether interstate, intrastate, or driven by violent extremism, frequently intersect with issues of faith, identity, and belief. Research and evidence consistently show that promoting and protecting freedom of religion or belief is not merely a moral imperative or a human rights concern, it is a practical strategy for conflict prevention, long-term peace, and resilience. Everyone in this room has their own lived experience testifying to the value of religious freedom. In fact, it has been one of the honors of my life to work alongside so many of you in your fight to secure religious freedom for yourselves, your families, and your communities. And that includes Grace, who just did a beautiful job representing her family and her father. You have been the ones who have lived and seen what having religious freedom for a community means and what not having it means. You know that firsthand, religious freedom fosters meaningful dialogue, reduces grievances, bridges divides, and promotes reconciliation, encourages economic development and pluralism. You know that when conscience is respected, people are more likely to resolve differences through conversation rather than coercion. decreasing the likelihood of violence. Conversely, the suppression of religious freedom, whether it be government restrictions, discriminatory laws, or societal hostility, fuels instability on a profound scale. When state or non-state actors deny people the right to believe, worship, or live according to their conscience, it generates deep resentments, marginalizes groups, and creates fertile ground for extremism and terrorism. Persecution doesn't just harm individuals. It erodes trust in institutions, exacerbates divisions, and can escalate into broader insecurity that spills across borders. You are all here today because you know that religious freedom is a stabilizer. And our panel today will explore this dynamic in greater depth. We recognize that while it is not a panacea, advancing and elevating religious freedom must remain a core foreign policy priority and national security imperative. So let's begin. Our first question, Nicole, drawing from your extensive work at Freedom House and the George W. Bush Institute. By the way, thank you for that video. That was beautiful. As well as your insights from organizations like the Institute for Economics and Peace. Could you share with us some specific data statistics that demonstrate how greater religious freedom correlates with reduced conflict, increased societal peace, and overall global stability?
Excellent. Thank you. And thank you for everybody being here. And thank you also to Sam and Katrina just for extraordinary leadership in pulling this group together. I was telling Katrina earlier that when we think about how polarized we are in the world and in our country, when you have a room full of people who fundamentally believe different things, and yet we come together very much around fundamental freedoms and truth and democracy, it gives me a lot of hope for what lies ahead because we have been doing this for so many years. The report that you talked about, the Institute for Economics and Peace, did a great study in which it looked specifically at restrictions on religious freedom and showed a direct correlation. Where there is fewer restrictions on religious freedom, there is greater peace and stability in countries. And there is a straight line on the scattergram that looks specifically, that says the more restrictions there are, the greater instability and the greater challenges that societies face. And a lot of it comes back to the conversation that we had this morning, looking specifically at what can democracies do. It's really important that when we're thinking about religious freedom and national security, that we look at the nature of the regimes that are behind a lot of the suppression of religious freedom that we see. In many cases, they are autocratic governments or violent non-state actors that not only are going after what is the foundational human right that we have and share universally, but it is part of a larger effort of these regimes to consolidate their power. And when you look at the countries that are on the countries of particular concern list, and you look at the countries that our national security agencies are most concerned about, that are a threat to democracies, that are a threat to the global system, they look pretty similar. Because these autocratic regimes have decided that suppressing the voices of those people that they are fearful of and that provide a threat to their complete control of power is part of their strategy. And their strategy is to control, through violence at home and violence abroad, control anything that could be a threat to their regime. So it's really important that we are integrating religious freedom as an integrated part of a national security and foreign policy strategy, because that is the way many of these adversaries are looking at it. And just to your point also, Sarah, that many of the individuals and people in this room and communities that face that suppression, we know because it is a fundamental freedom, it is a longing of the human heart. People who believe and are following their conscience will not sit idly by. They will push back. They will go to the streets. They will push for them to be able to live freely. And that is what causes instability at times in a society, because people are choosing to push back on that repression. There are times when that spills into violent action, and there's many, many times, as we all know, that that is a regular non-violent action as well. So it's just as important for us to be thinking, when we're thinking about our national security, we're thinking about our foreign policy, that religious freedom is central to both from a human rights perspective, but certainly from a national security perspective.
Thank you, Nicole. Principal Advisor Walker, congratulations on your new post.
Thank you.
Round of applause. He deserves it.
Thank you.
He is now serving as President Trump's principal advisor on religious freedom, and I know you have already been busy, and we're all so very grateful that you are in this role. As the President's key advocate for religious freedom, could you share some insight on the specific actions the U.S. government is currently taking to promote and encourage religious freedom on a global scale, and what tools, whether those be diplomatic, economic, or legislative measures, are at its disposal to advance these efforts?
First of all, thank you, Sarah, for the opportunity. Thanks for all your work over the years as well. And to all those that are, whether they're watching via stream or those out here today, I want to say thank you for your great advocacy for people who can't be here, who can't raise their voices. I think it's very important that we look at these issues not just from an activism or an awareness, but to begin to be talking about what are the action steps, what are the concrete things. And I think one of the things with President Trump, he really set the tone in the first administration when he became the first president in history to host a conference at the United Nations primarily on religious liberty. He's followed up with that. In fact, last fall, I believe, and I want to get his words just right, when he was speaking at the UN General Assembly, he said, defend free speech and free expression and to protect religious liberty, including the most persecuted religion on the planet today, Christianity. Secretary Rubio, who I consider a dear friend, I've known him when I first came into the U.S. Congress back in 2015. Most of you have followed his strong leadership. He is a huge advocate and continues to be for religious expression, for religious liberty across the world. You know, in part in answering this question, in sensing the weight of the responsibility, I was in London at an event sponsored by BYU back in last June or July, and a lady by the name of Baroness Emma Roberts, I believe her name was, and someone that was not shy. In the late 80s, she had worked with Margaret Thatcher, and could have been her hatchet lady, I don't know, but she was a tough gal. But she came up, and I just met her. She put her hand right on my chest, and she said, Congressman, she said, do you understand the responsibility that America plays in this role? She said, you know, you have to be the beacon of hope for religious liberty. She said, because you're the only one that has it written in your law. So when I think about the responsibility that this administration has, whether it's our members in the House or the Senate, their friends and colleagues over there, we do have a responsibility to raise our voices, but then to add to those voices specific action steps and measures that we would see and deem necessary. One of the things that we have, one of the tools, if you will, is to be able to put a country on the particular countries of particular concern. Now, for some of you that may be new, some of you that may understand, only the President of the United States and the Secretary of State has the authority to designate a country on the CPC list. There are other lists. There's a special watch list. I won't call it necessarily a precursor in that. But one of the action steps that was crucial over the last 6 or 7 months, Nigeria has really become to the forefront. 70% of all Christians that are martyred come out of the continent of Africa, and 90% of that number have come out of the country, specifically of Nigeria. In fact, we had a great conversation with the governor there today and what they're trying to do and work. So when President Trump took a bold step to list them as a CPC list, it was an action step. It was one that was much needed to be able to tell not only the government but to the rest of the world that we're monitoring these things. When this kind of egregious behavior, these kind of atrocities are committed, you know, I've thought often, I was a pastor and a minister for 16 years before entering into Congress, working in mission trips, working in some interesting places, what it must be like for a young child to wonder which terroristic group may be bursting through their door that night to kidnap them or their parents or even worse. So to be able to have that tool at our disposal, I think is very, very crucial. And not only just to make sure that countries are thinking, well, I'm not on the CPC list, we're off the hook. That's not necessarily so. We saw Secretary Rubio leading, most recently, restricting some of the visa programs for those individuals, those bad actors that would be utilizing their authority or other things to attack the most vulnerable in our faith communities. We've seen individuals already become restricted from being able to come here based on that action by Secretary Rubio. So those are just a couple of examples as we continue to get out there and to engage. As principal advisor in this particular, I guess specifically on my behalf as far as what action role, is to connect with my colleagues there in the House and the Senate and look for policy opportunities, for measures. We've got some great guys over there that are very concerned, authentically concerned about what's happening across the world, not just in Nigeria, and partnering them to push for legislation that lasts much longer than just a single administration to make sure that we're doing all we can both now and in the future to protect those people across the world that are willing to stand up for their faith.
Thank you. And I've gotten to know you a bit over the past 6-9 months or so, and you are the perfect man for this job, and we are all very grateful that you're there. I do just want to remind everybody that President Trump in 2018 took the opportunity when then President Buhari from Nigeria visited during a state visit to bring up the issue of the Christians then, and Nigeria did not do anything about it for many years. So, there are so many different tools and ways that this can be addressed, sometimes privately, sometimes publicly, obviously through these other tools. But I'm grateful to see the president continuing to speak about that and make that an issue. And I know we all pray that Nigeria learns their lesson this time and gets the job done this time and fixes the problem. So thank you for your work. Scott, from your decades of experience advancing human rights and religious freedom at the State Department, also White House National Security Council, before me, but shared seats there, and now as Senior Advisor at Human Rights First, could you share your insight on the evidence-based linkages between violations of religious freedom, protections and national security, and effective forms of advocacy given those linkages? And similarly, maybe you can talk some about countries where you've seen higher levels of religious freedom leading to reduced instability, stronger economic performance, and enhanced long-term security, and maybe what policy implications this holds for the U.S.
Well, thanks, Sarah, and thanks for having me here. I'm a generalist, human rights generalist, and I advocated on a wide range of issues over the 30-year course of my career, including religious freedom. And I was a civil servant, serving both Republican and Democratic administrations. And I want to reinforce a point that Nicole made, which was I watched both Republicans and Democrats speak to this issue, support this issue. I was actually in the Clinton White House when the IRF Act was passed, in part with the support of the Clinton administration, and I saw how it was implemented under subsequent administration. So I do think we need to retain that history, remind ourselves of that history. The second cool thing I find about freedom of religion is that it encompasses all the other fundamental freedoms in it. Fundamental freedoms being freedom of peaceful assembly, freedom of association, freedom of expression, freedom of movement. You find all those features within religious freedom. So religious freedom is a barometer, generally, I have found in my career, for how other freedoms are treated. Similarly, I found that where you see restrictions on other fundamental freedoms besides religious freedom, you then also see restrictions on religious freedom. So in as Nicole pointed out as well, too, I think there is a strong correlation between religious freedom and democracy as well. What I found over the course of my career was that advocacy for religious freedom was most effective when it was effectively integrated into our general human rights advocacy as well as our national security. So it wasn't an issue off on its own, making its own case. It wasn't just Mark going into the Secretary of State's office or the President's office to make the case. It was also the Assistant Secretary for DRL. It was also other national security officials making that case. So I think it's very important to think about linkages among issues, particularly other human rights issues and religious freedom, as well as linkages between national security and religious freedom. Two cases in point that I experienced. One, I was a member of one of the first dialogues we held with the Burmese government And soon after Burma started to open up, it's unfortunately closed down big time since then, but as it was opening up, they agreed to have a human rights dialogue. And one of the most effective things about that dialogue was we managed to persuade a uniformed Department of Defense official to join us on the delegation to make the case for human rights and particularly religious freedom there. As any of you who know Burma know that the religious freedom issues there are profound, whether it's the Rohingya, whether it's Karen Christians, those are significant issues. And having that uniform national security official there on our delegation, we could tell got the other side to pay greater attention. So that's one thing that has to happen.
That's a great example.
The other case that I remember, I did a lot of human rights dialogues and advocacy for human rights and for religious freedom in Vietnam. And there too, we sought to integrate religious freedom into the whole basket of issues that we were advocating with the Vietnamese government. Moreover, we managed to link those issues to both trade issues as well as national security issues. So getting those other agencies and other officials to be part of the team, if you will, in advocating for religious freedom is absolutely key. The last point I want to make, given the integration of religious freedom with other human rights, is the importance of our international treaties that commit us to protecting religious freedom globally. International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, as well as others. And we at Human Rights First have undertaken a specific effort to try to encourage governments around the world to respect these treaties, to adhere to these treaties. And if anyone wants to sign on to our joint letter urging governments to do that, we would welcome it. Please, you can look for me afterwards.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you, Scott. We've got a few more minutes, and so I thought I would ask a question for you all to respond to. In your collective experience advocating for religious freedom, how would you describe the inherent vulnerabilities of autocratic regimes when it comes to allowing religious liberty? And specifically, why does religious freedom often serve as an Achilles heel for autocrats, potentially undermining their control through moral authority, community mobilization, all kinds of ways? But why is it their Achilles heel? How have you seen that?
I'd be happy to jump in on that. I think when you look at many of the autocratic regimes around the world, they are trying to ensure that they hold tightly to power, that there is no threat from any group that is assembling independently, that is thinking independently, or that is challenging their thinking. That's why they go after oppositionists very quickly. That's why they go after unionists very quickly. But there's something unique about faith communities. They hold as an inherent part something much higher than any government, than any administration, than any one individual who chooses to take hold of power. And that's an inherent threat to an autocratic regime, because these are people, and you heard it from Grace, and you heard it how her father is navigating a horrible, horrible, unjust detention by thinking of something which is far bigger than his personal status right now and the government that has unjustly imprisoned him. And that is a threat. I think we have an opportunity to flip the script on many of these autocrats and show that communities of faith are actually the stabilizing force in many, many countries, because they are focused on what is most important: worship, or coming together and doing service, or contributing to their community. It's an opportunity to do that, but it's also an opportunity for us to ensure that autocrats are not getting away with denying that fundamental freedom as part of their control of power.
So this is kind of the lightning round. So
yes, sir. Yes.
Former pastor and politician, those are foreign to me. But nevertheless, we'll do what we can here. Wonderful answer, by the way. You know, the biggest threat to these autocrats, if you will, is whether we fundamentally believe something that changes the whole dynamic. And it's simply this: do we believe that our rights come from God Almighty, our Creator, or do we believe they come from man, from an autocrat, from a dictator, from a government? And if we believe genuinely that our rights come from our Creator, there is nothing more appalling, nothing more threatening to these autocrats. Because what it does, it collectively brings us together to lock arms, to be willing to be bold in pushing back. There is no greater cause than standing up for our faith There is no greater cause for advocating for those who cannot or are pressed to the place in an autocracy that they don't have the ability to be able to do that. So that's why I think it's so important that our government leads and continues to honor our founding documents that clearly states that our rights do indeed come from our Creator, because then they cannot be limited by man. You can't have some autocrat come in and basically say, well, you're no longer allowed to express your faith. You're no allowed to sing your songs, to quote your scripture, to quote your books. That is what I believe is fundamentally allows us to be able to build the most strength and to be able to have the most success pushing back collectively, is understanding indeed where our rights do come from.
Right.
I would quickly say one basic point. Autocracies are inherently fragile. Why is that? They lack the consent of their people. And when a government lacks or regime lacks the consent of its people, it is always inherently fragile. It's always subject to quickly changing when the autocrat has screwed up, as is often the case.
Right.
We saw that in the former Soviet Union. We've seen it in a number of other cases. So I think it's incumbent on this community, as well as the wider human rights and democracy community, to think in a forward way about, okay, when China falls, when North Korea falls, hard to predict when that will happen, we need to put in place in advance both the principles and the people who can take over when those regimes collapse.
I'd like to take a personal point of privilege and mention something to you, but before I do, to your point, sir, I think I've been asked so many times by other faith communities why I support them, right? I happen to be a Christian, that's my personal faith, but I have worked so closely with my Uyghur friends, some of whom have become like family to me. My dear friend Ziba, whose mother has been in prison for 7 years, has a 20-year sentence by the CCP. I fight for her and her family all the time. The Yazidi men and women that I met in Iraq and became so close to. And often people have asked, you know, why do you fight for these other faiths? You're a Christian. And I think the power and the strength in believing that we are all children of God, regardless of who that God is, right? And we are all image bearers. And that's why we love and support each other, right? So, that is an important point, and one that I hope we don't all miss. It's why we support and are there for each other. With regard to this question in particular and this sort of Achilles heel, I would encourage you all to watch a film called A Faith Under Siege. It's a documentary film about what Vladimir Putin has done to particularly evangelical and Protestant communities inside of occupied Ukraine. They have targeted them, and there's a reason for that. And I think the panelists all just described what that reason is. And I'd say about 15, 20 minutes into the film, there's a very eloquent and wonderful pastor who says, you know, why is Putin so scared of us? Why does he hate us? And it's because we have one authority, and it's not him, it's Jesus Christ. So I'd encourage you all to watch that. I think it really outlines what we've just described. Again, it's called A Faith Under Siege. I want to thank you all so much for your time today, for using your background, your experience to have this conversation. And thank you all for being here. God bless you and your work. And we look forward to seeing you all after this.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.
I was a little child when they came. With fire and fury, they came to a village. They took my family, me and my brother and my parents. They marked many homes with the N, Nazar Nazarene, a symbol of death for the Christian and other minorities.
You will not have safety, even in your dreams, until you embrace Islam.
They told us we were nothing, that our faith made us less than humans. They sold us, they used us, but they could not take our souls.
We're going to call this fund the Nazarene Fund. I give you my word, we will raise $1 million to help you. We have raised $1 million. Let's see if we can raise another $1 million and see if we can get 80 families. have to save these Christian communities in the Middle East. The Christian communities that were there first. Some of these were there with the apostles.
We thought we forgot him. But then you came. You found us, rescued us, and gave us a second chance, a new life. Where once our lives were sorrow, they now happiness. You saw us, you saved us, and you gave us hope. Thank you.
And now, please welcome from Save Armenia, Paul Murray.
Good afternoon. I want to speak briefly about Armenia. Armenia is not simply another country navigating a difficult neighborhood. It is the world's first Christian nation. For nearly 2,000 years, its faith, culture, and people have endured through war, displacement, and profound loss, while continuing to hold fast to their identity and beliefs. Today, Armenia, a country that holds true to religious freedom for all, stands at an important and delicate moment. The pressures it faces are no longer always visible on the battlefield. They increasingly take shape through negotiation, diplomacy, and long-term strategic pressure. Historically, our history teaches us that these periods of transition are often the most consequential, not because conflict is loud, but because it becomes easier to assume stability and move on. Religious freedom does not exist in isolation. It depends on secure borders, functioning institutions, and a nation's ability to make decisions free from coercion. When sovereignty is weakened or pressure is applied unevenly, faith communities are among the first to feel the consequences, even when no single dramatic event captures attention. And that is why Armenia belongs in the conversation at this summit. Our faithfulness in moments like this is not only about belief, it's about stewardship. It's about vigilance. And it's about ensuring that peace, when pursued, is grounded in durability rather than wishful thinking. Save Armenia exists because responsibility does not end when headlines fade. It exists to help leaders remain attentive, informed, and prepared so that progress is measured carefully and freedom is protected over time. I ask you to keep Armenia in view during this meeting, to remember that the work of religious freedom is often, think of this, tested not in moments of crisis, but in moments of quiet decision. Thank you very much.
Welcome to the stage for a discussion on today's most pressing IRF issues. Moderator, author, and senior editor, The Epoch Times, Jan Jekielek, along with IRF Summit co-chairs Katrina Lantos-Sweat and Ambassador Sam Brownback.
So it's an absolute incredible honor for me to be up here on stage with two of my true, real heroes. Please give them a round. I mean, thank you, thank you, thank you. So I started out in the China human rights space. This is actually how I got involved in the Epoch Times in the first place. We were a very small media, but we were the only media back in the day that didn't believe the narrative that China was going to liberalize because we knew of the religious persecutions that were happening. We were actually reporting on them during that time. And it's kind of an unbelievable thing that our media that got started at by Georgia Tech students on the issue of religious persecution and religious freedom, right? Falun Gong practitioners at Georgia Tech started the Epoch Times. Today has become one of the largest media in America, you know, 4th by paid subscribers.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's just an unbelievable shift in tone and tenor. And I think the same thing has happened with religious freedom, actually, right? I feel like, you know, Scott Busby was talking in just the panel before, how I do think that religious freedom is being integrated into questions of diplomacy, into questions of national security, much, much more. And I think that these two here have played a very significant role in actually making this happen. And also, of course, your father, Katrina, Tom Lantosh. So let's start here, okay? Let's talk about this, how religious freedom seems to have come really center stage, become something that's become more integrated and important in a way that it certainly wasn't 20 years ago when I started with it.
It has, Jan, and I'm delighted to hear. I was surprised when I heard Epoch Times had grown that big.
Mm-hmm.
That's enormous. You know, when I first started working in this space, and that was 25 some years ago, you could get the people that are advocating for religious freedom in a phone booth. And I know people now don't even know what a phone booth is, but it really was a small space. And look, the rooms, you know, we've got people from wall to wall in this room here. That is really amazing that that's taken place. But at the same time, what I think we've got to see ourselves as is that we've kind of been climbing up the backside of the mountain where nobody could see us for a long period of time. And now we're up at a perch that a lot of people are shooting at us. So how many of you experienced or have known somebody that's experienced transnational oppression? That's my point actually right there, is that's actually a good sign. You're known by your friends as well as your enemies. But we've got to now that we're in the center of the debate and the discussion, we've got to act like it. We've got to have our factual settings together. We've got to be careful and cautious, but bold and courageous. At the same time, we've got to form alliances and pull people in, not just from religious freedom, but also from democracy movements, from security movements, and to make this thing a global movement, a grassroots movement, because that's where we win, as a global grassroots movement.
And, you know, Katrina, you've been kind of, I guess, leading the charge, I could say, in making sure that this is a movement that's, I guess, open to absolutely everybody across the political spectrum, but also people of different faiths and perhaps of no faith as well, right? And so speak to that, please.
Well, you know, when I come to the IRF Summit, I always feel like I've entered a little island of refuge from the incredible division that seems to be afflicting our society, and I'm sure many other societies around the world. We have become deeply divided, deeply hostile towards those who don't agree with us politically or on some other criteria. But Ambassador Brownback and I certainly have felt that as it relates to the fight to defend religious freedom for everyone everywhere, it is of paramount importance that this remain really not just a bipartisan cause, but a nonpartisan cause. I was actually so grateful to hear Paula White say almost exactly those words this morning in her keynote address. And you do feel it. It's like a little island of unity when we come to the IRF Summit, because there are people here, obviously from a huge range of faith traditions, but also from very different places on the political spectrum. But we get it, that this cause is bigger than politics of the day. This cause is more profound and ultimately more unifying than the many things that pull us apart. And for me, as a lifelong Democrat, it has been really important to kind of be, if you will, an ambassador to my side of the aisle. You know, there have been too many times in the past where I think maybe some Democrats have always felt like the words religious freedom should be accompanied by proverbial scare quotes, we don't want to go there. Well, that is really a mistaken way of looking at the world. And I do think that it is beginning to change. And, the ambassador spoke about how the movement is growing, how there's more awareness of the way that religious freedom impacts on our economic welfare, our security welfare. I also feel that part of the reason our movement is growing is there's an unease about the pervasive nihilism we see in the world around us. Nihilism, this philosophy, either moral nihilism, there's no such thing as right and wrong, or existential nihilism, life itself has no meaning, no purpose. It's a terrible way to live. It's a terrible way for a community and a society to feel. And I do think, especially maybe even among young people, that you sense that they're moving away from that somewhat aimless and nihilistic view of life and searching for something more meaningful. And I hope that will also kind of help us recruit a new generation of leaders to this movement, because they are starting to understand how important it is to have a defining purpose and sense of meaning and consequence to your life.
This speaks so deeply to me, right? A number of people here, I think in this room, have spoken to me about Epoch Times and about how we're kind of, a thing that makes us unique is that we're very obviously pro-faith, but not necessarily a specific faith. We have kind of an open door, but not many media these days are. And then there is this incredible polarization, particularly in the media. So what we strive to do is always try to write and build material, build content. I hate that term, but that can speak to the people that are not necessarily aligned, right? Yeah. Because this is what we had to do with China back in the day. But actually, let's talk about that for a moment, okay? Because Sam, you have a book, China's War on Faith. It's an incredible book. I read it because you asked me to endorse it, which I did wholeheartedly. And you focus on this idea in there, I think, quite a bit, that that religious freedom should be a centerpiece of diplomacy. Like, this is the way to go. But at the same time, this is a particularly difficult actor to deal with, right?
Oh, it's a horrible, difficult actor to deal with. But I've got my Ronald Reagan socks on. I'm an open and notorious Republican. But I mention that also here because I think he really kind of shows some of the way on this. When he went after the Soviet Union before he was president, a lot of the things he talked about was how they treated the Jewish refuseniks. And the evangelicals that were being persecuted at the time too, and you're kind of just going, well, yes, that's important. That's not a huge population. It's not going to overturn the Soviet Union, but it is going to overturn the Soviet Union because it delegitimizes the regime. That if you can't treat your own people any better than that, how do you expect that we should have you run the world? If this is how you treat your own people. And that's the same thing with what's taking place with Communist China. How it treats the Falun Gong is more than barbaric. Forced organ harvesting, and you've got the book that just come out on that.
So I was just going to say, I'm kind of the odd girl out on this panel because these guys both have extraordinary books that every single one of you are going to want to read. I don't have a book. But I do want to say that I had the opportunity to read, Jan, your book, which is coming out, Killing to Order, which talks exactly about this unimaginably evil practice of forced organ harvesting. And I'm so grateful you wrote it because it's something so chilling and appalling that a lot of people don't even want to think about it or talk about it. But you bring it to us in a way that we can understand, and we need to recognize, which I think is sort of what you were saying, Ambassador, that these kinds of barbaric and evil practices, they reveal the character, the underlying character of the adversary. They are not an isolated sort of aberration. They are a revelation of the dark evil that lies at the heart of the Chinese communist regime and their massive repression of every community of faith is another indicator of that.
Well, and also kind of supporting a lot of repression in other places, right? This is something else that they're particularly good at. And I mean, this is something you talked about a lot.
Yeah, and that's the part that really sends chills down my spine is the capacity of the surveillance technology that's out there now, and it's being freely shared. And now we're going to be facing and seeing that in a number of countries because the autocrats have figured out you got to suppress the people of faith. These are the first ones they attack, the last ones left standing. That's who we represent, is these people that are attacked in those areas. And now you're going to fight against more technology with it. But we can do that. We can pray, but we can also act. And that's what I love about you guys. You're the ones that will act. And it'll get out there and fight. And the odds look terrible and long, and it looks like, you know what, I ought to just go home and have a cup of tea. And just, we can't win this. We can win this. We will win this. We have to win this for the future of the world. We have to win this fight. And you're the centerpiece of getting it done.
And, something we were talking about offline with Katrina, we have to do it with obviously these unusually bad actors like Communist China, but we kind of also need to do it with our friends and allies who are going to stray as well. And I mean, it's important, right? There's a certain sort of, if we want to have the moral authority, we need to do that.
Well, I do think that that's really necessary. And, as the ambassador said, I mean, there are some unbelievably horrible actors in the world, but we need to be concerned when we see democratic friends backsliding. I think about, South Korea and Japan are examples. We see them kind of starting to weaponize law against religious minorities. That's not okay. I just heard a couple of days ago about a situation where the government of Mexico, someone associated with it, sort of ordered an individual, a religious figure who was going to come and speak at the summit, said, don't go. This is Mexico, our neighbor to the south. These are problematic because we don't want to leave any faith communities behind. We don't want to see democracies backslide and think they can get away with it. And we want to have credibility. If you only attack your adversaries, people say, well, we understand why you're doing that. But if you're willing to have hard conversations with your friends, I think that carries a certain credibility with it.
So we've got absolutely. We've got just a moment of time left, just a kind of quick final thought as we finish up, as I like to say on American thought leaders on the show you've both been on, actually, now that I think about it. But yeah, a couple of quick thoughts. Maybe let's start with Katrina, and then we'll go with the ambassador.
Oh gosh, my go-to is always one of the phrases for which my late father was most famous. I hope I'm not repeating myself, but he was a Holocaust survivor and a very admirable and great man. But he once said that the veneer of civilization is paper thin. We are its guardians, and we can never rest. And I live by that.
And mine is, ladies and gentlemen, enjoy this time that you're here. Don't network, build relationships. I've said this before, share family photos, and then let's keep the fight going stronger. Let's build the flame bigger for this cause by this group and carry it around the world, and we will win with that.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Joining us on stage, Sam Azkul. Mr. Azkul is a Druze American physician and human rights advocate. Across the distance, he remains deeply connected to the Druze community in his native Syria.
Well, hello. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you about my community. The Druze worldwide number about 1.5 million people, and origins trace back to 11th century Egypt. I'm going to take you on a journey to Sueda, the community where the highest Druze people live. Before we land there, I'm going to tell you something about their tradition. It's very unique to the region. As a stranger, when you walk into a house, any house, you will be offered coffee, Arabian coffee with cardamom, a taste that will linger for the rest of the day, and a memory that will last for the rest of your life. We have some people offering coffee. If you raise your hand, if you'd like to try. Also, something very traditional in Sueda, people will welcome you warmly with the expression ahla wa sahla, which means welcome, an endearing welcome. Now imagine that you are with your family gathered in Sueda, getting ready for the next day. The father is a business owner reviewing finances. The mother is an attorney getting ready for her busy day in court. The two boys are college students getting ready for an upcoming exam. It's late at night, you switch off the light, you lock the doors, and you go to sleep. Now imagine you wake up the following morning to the noise of gunfire. You open the door, strangers with beards, military fatigues, ISIS slogans, and government emblem, pointing Kalashnikovs at you. And before you have the chance to say ahla wa sahla, they ask you to identify your religion. At that moment, you realize that your sense of peace, security, and safety is nothing but an illusion, and it's going to crumble because you are a Druze. They come in, they humiliate, loot, destroy, kill the whole family, and move on to the next house. This is a true story of a Bueni family, one of hundreds that took place in Sueda on July 14th and 15th of last year. Between 1,500 and 3,000 people were killed over the course of 48 hours, which represent about 1% of the population. 195,000 people were displaced. 36 villages were occupied. Even the hospital where I learned to put my first sutures was attacked, including the killing of 2 of my colleague physicians. Our Israeli Druze community lobbied their government to act, and the atrocities did not stop until Israel intervened. This tragedy had very little coverage from global media. The Druze represent 3% of the Syrian population, but they were instrumental in its history. In the last civil war, Druze peacefully protested Assad's attack against their fellow Syrians, and they refused to enlist in the military. Sueda became a safe haven for displaced families, and we welcomed them inside our houses with ahla wa sahla. Throughout the past millennia, the Druze have been targeted by massacres and attacks based on their religious identity, but this attack was different. Despite being generous, patriotic, and great, we were attacked by the very people we once defended. In the last 9 months alone, similar attacks against the Christians, the Alawites, and the Kurds took place in Syria, while foreign jihadis are being nationalized. Almost every day of the calendar, 9/11, October 7th, July 14th, marks a memory of innocent people, innocent lives killed because they belong to the wrong religion. I hope you can see the pattern. I urge each one of you to call your Syrian counterpart and ask them the question, why? Why did you do that to the Druze? Thank you, and ahla wa sahla.
Welcome to the stage, our panel for the case for investing in IRF. Moderator, U.S. Representative Dan Church Aide Kristen Rasmussen. Deputy Secretary of Management and Resources, U.S. Department of State, Michael Regis. And Chairman of the Board, National Endowment for Democracy, Peter Roshcom.
Thank you so much. It is my true honor to be here together with these esteemed guests. And we've heard so much today. Really, the scene has been set for us in terms of this conversation about the case for investing in IRF. International religious freedom really forms the basis of so many societies. It offers stability, and we really recognize insights from the other panelists. They set us well for this discussion. The importance of international religious freedom has gained prominence over the past decade, and this summit is a testament to that. We see governments around the world, including the Danish government. The organization that I work for gets about half of its funding from them, as well as other European governments, and of course the US government paying increased attention to this issue. So with this additional value that international religious freedom has brought, I would like to ask our panelists some questions about what you have seen in terms of examples where perhaps the US government, in the case of you, Deputy Secretary, is making, and where you see that could take the US government and its partners forward.
Sure. Well, thank you very much. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me. The issue of religious freedom is something that I've taken a personal interest in as the Deputy Secretary. Secretary Rubio has taken a very strong interest in. The President himself, obviously, has led the charge on this issue around the world for the plight of persecuted Christians around the world. Certainly in Nigeria is, I think, the most prominent example that people have seen, but really all over the world, where he is, both in his first and now in his second administration, personally working for the release of pastors who have been imprisoned, of other people of faith who've been imprisoned. He has a real heart for people of faith, for people of conscience, as do I, as does the Secretary. And so, I make it a point in all of my travels, I do a fair amount of traveling around the world, to have a religious freedom touch point, meeting with faith leaders, especially in parts of the world where religious minorities might have a more difficult time than others, to let them know that we see them, we hear them, and the United States supports their rights for freedom of conscience and to be able to practice their faith freely.
Yes. And I think one of the critical aspects of working with faith leaders is that they are really moral leaders also within the communities, and they're trusted by communities, and they can offer a sense of stability. So, Peter, what have you seen as far as examples of this with the National Endowment for Democracy? I know you have a lot of partners that you work with. Can you express some examples where you've seen faith leaders really, bring stability, for example?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And let me echo the Deputy Secretary's priority on highlighting religious liberty. And the more I think about it, and I'll get to an example in a second, but the more I think about it, the more I realize in the idea of people standing up for themselves, religious freedom is actually scandalous. Religious freedom says to the tyrant, there is somebody that I worship and it's not you, tyrant. There is somebody who has my real deep allegiance and it's not you. And if we are able to empower that kind of voice in these various communities, then it will be so much better off. So one of the best examples, of course, is the Dalai Lama. Dalai Lama standing up within the tradition of Tibetan Buddhism, and at the same time deeply and inextricably linked to voices of democracy, and he's been an incredible influence all the way around the world. The National Endowment for Democracy has had a long-standing relationship with the Dalai Lama, and in fact, just about a month ago or so, we had our Democracy Awards, and part of his organization was one of the entities that we highlighted, along with Uyghurs in China and along with imprisoned pastors in Chinese house churches. So one of the abilities that organizations like the National Endowment for Democracy, entities as powerful as the United States government or the Danish government, or all the voices that are here today, is the power to draw attention to things. And as Deputy Secretary said a minute ago, if somebody of his stature is going into these meetings, with interlocutors around the world and says, hey, there's something else on the agenda, and I want to be talking about religious freedoms, the power of that is just incredible. So my hat's off to you for your sense of mission and your sense of calling in drawing attention to people who have no voice.
Thank you.
And I wanted to also bring some attention to the issue of evidence to support the thesis that countries with greater religious freedom consistently outperform others on key measures of global competitiveness and economic growth. That really having that, people feeling secure in expressing themselves and really having that space can lead to so many other opportunities, potential, and that not only governments but also the private sector has a role to play in providing those opportunities and to be a partner. And we do see that actually, an increased number of Fortune 500 companies really investing in this issue of religious freedom, for all religions, right? Let's be clear. And if you can tell us some examples that you have heard of or that you're aware of, either one of you, could be globally or within the U.S. government or companies rather.
Well, I think it's interesting because there's a little bit of tension in the argument, and I take the argument at face value. That is, if there is a robust civil society and if there's an ability to be free, then by definition you're going to create more opportunity, and you can almost feel the pressure coming down. My experience, though, is that people of faith are a little bit troubled by that sometimes, by saying, hey, my faith is not a utilitarian thing. My faith is driven by revelation. It's driven by the idea that I have a relationship with God and I'm following Him, etc. So I think that it can be a little bit of a plot trap to be arguing too robustly into this is a good economic plan for development that is to support religious freedom. But the bottom line is, it is good. It does create opportunity. It does create markets, and it does create a wholesomeness that I think is something to really enjoy.
Yeah, I would second that. I think there are different faith traditions that treat material wealth and well-being sort of differently. But I think the important thing is, look, we call religious freedom in the United States is enshrined in our First Amendment, and it's our first freedom. And I think that's not an accident that it was number one on the Bill of Rights, the First Amendment to the Constitution, because I think it is so important to just an individual's right to be a person, to be able to relate with their family, with their community, and to be able to be productive and free members of society, even if they don't necessarily agree with everyone on how to practice faith or how to worship or how to live their lives, but that we can do that peacefully and we can all live side by side and respect our differences.
Absolutely, and that's one of the things that a lot of civil society organizations do, is to bring different faith groups together, right? In countries like the Democratic Republic of Congo, as we heard the example earlier today. The Central African Republic is an area where DCA, the organization that I work for, brings together different faith groups in a post-conflict context. That can be a very powerful thing. And then that provides stability, as we heard in one of the earlier panels, which then can encourage the private sector to come in as one of the factors, at least, to provide that kind of stability.
You know, I think it's interesting just to kind of build on this idea of calling things what they are and to reflect on the power of that. So Natan Sharansky, the Jewish refusenik in the Soviet Union, told an interesting story. And he said that when he was imprisoned, and he was imprisoned for his faith, he heard that Ronald Reagan, then President of the United States, had called the Soviet Union an evil empire. And as Sharansky told the story, he said when he heard that the American president had called the Soviet Union that, he said he knew it was the beginning of the end. Because to speak with that clarity and that understanding and without ambiguity, he said, not only did I know it, but the guards in the Gulag knew it too. And I think that therein lies, I think, the power of this gathering, IRF, and all those who are actively participating to be voices for this around the world and to recognize that saying it, naming it, calling it out, and not letting religious freedom get sidelined as some fringe issue that's just a bumper sticker on the back of a car, but turning that into policy and prescriptions and expectations is absolutely remarkable. And yes, is there a social and economic benefit to this? It's true implicitly. But I think the power of speaking the truth in these situations is just demonstrative and palpable. That's one of the reasons that the National Endowment Democracy is actively supporting this summit today and has increased funding either 2- or 3-fold over the past couple of years to say this is an incredible investment in terms of democracy and building up Democrats, small d Democrats around the world who are standing up for their own freedom.
Absolutely, and I think we would like to hear more from you, Deputy Secretary Regas, about the U.S. government's plans. You alluded to that earlier, but what I would reflect on is the role, again, of it can be community groups working together with civil society or on their own, churches. In many cases, we see Ukraine providing a lot of the support that's needed in the humanitarian response. And I know that this administration is prioritizing working through those groups. Again, as I said earlier, they are close to communities, they're trusted by communities, and they often have ways of working that might not be possible, even for governments or other sectors. Do you have any reflections on that, and more specifically what this administration is planning in that regard?
Sure. So, as you note, religious communities, civil society organizations, they have a relationship, a trusted relationship with their communities that maybe a large national government would not have, because these are the people that are their neighbors, that they live with, that they worship with every week. And our ability to be able to support those organizations and support not necessarily a particular organization, but to support their right to be able to assemble, to be able to minister to their neighbors, to be able to help them with their material needs, their spiritual needs. Unfortunately, there are governments in the world that view that as a threat to their power, a threat to their influence over their citizens or their subjects, however they might see them. And we try to lead by example. The president has said, look, we're not going to, it's not our mission to go around the world and reshape other countries and cultures in our own image. But I think we also have an obligation to lead by example and say, hey, your country will be better, the world will be better if you allow your citizens to be able to live freely, to be able to engage in their faith, in their traditions, to be able to live according to their conscience. And these are not inconsistent with being a great country. And in fact, in our case, they're a requirement for being a great country. Well, look, we're the greatest, we're the most powerful, the strongest economy in the world, and we have this fundamental freedom. So I think that's one of the ways that we can show other countries that, look, you don't have to be afraid of people practicing their faith and living side by side, even if they have different faith traditions in their country, that they can help ensure and protect those different communities to be able to practice their faith freely.
Mm-hmm. And so many people in the world, in fact, over 85% of people in the world do have some faith tradition. That is really something that can bring us together globally. And I just wanted to comment on all the people that I've met from around the world. It really is quite an impressive gathering of people that we have here. And it's a growing issue, one of importance. But I'm sure, as you were saying earlier, Peter, there are some skeptics out there who might think of religious freedom as an ambiguous concept. What would you say to them? What argument would you make for why this is so important? Those who are skeptical.
Here's my pitch. This is what I would say to them. There's a phrase that's attributed to St. Ambrose, where he is said to have said, "We don't impose on the world, we propose a more excellent way." I'll say it again. We don't impose on the world, we propose a more excellent way. Well, those of you who are familiar with Scripture know that that really goes back to 1 Corinthians, where St. Paul was writing. And at the end of chapter 12, he's giving all kinds of instructions, and then he says, here's the more excellent way, and it's the famous love chapter. So my pitch would be to skeptics to say, you've got nothing to lose by supporting religious freedom. Because if you don't, you leave so much on the table in terms of stability and magnanimity and comity within a community, and the ability of people to work together and to be gracious towards one another can be so uplifting all the way around. And you see where the world has gotten so uptight, and tyrants get fiercer and fiercer and fiercer and trying to control more and more and more, and it ultimately doesn't get them anywhere. You know, you look at today, right now, the Russian government is basically gaslighting the entire world, and what they're actually doing is removing evangelical Christians from areas where they have, where they've conquered. They've removed Catholic priests. There's a very powerful work called A Faith Under Siege that was put together by the Ukraine Freedom Project. It's a film that I commend to you. And it is basically bearing witness to religious persecution that's happening at this time. And I know we're represented today by people who have experienced religious persecution, who are in this room and are incredible examples of tenacity and clarity. But the pitch would be, you got nothing to lose. And instead, there's a great opportunity to create a more robust and dynamic civil society that inures to the benefit of your own people.
Yes, but I think there is this great fear, as you were saying earlier, right, that is certainly in authoritarian states, people who are people of faith have a higher belief, they believe in a higher power, and so that is a clear threat, right? But it can also, faith really serves to bring people together in profound ways that you don't necessarily see states always able to do. So can you give some examples, Deputy Secretary, I'll lean on you again, where we have seen this either in your role, your different roles in government, or in the private sector, where you have observed in your travels or in your negotiations, other meetings, where we've seen this kind of tension happening, where some skeptics say they don't actually think that this is possible to achieve unity through religious freedom, or that it's not such an important element as, say, some of the more standard aspects, economic development, for example.
Well, sure. I mean, whenever I'm engaged in my travels, meeting with government officials, meeting with religious leaders, look, we'll raise these issues that are issues of concern to us. And I think often just by showing up and having those meetings, we are sending a message, we're sending a signal. I tend not to sort of make a public, I will tell them, look, I'm not here to embarrass your government or embarrass you, but these are issues that are important to us, and I don't think they are going to cause you a negative impact if you address these in the way we think they ought to be addressed. If you let this person out, or if you allow these communities to be able to operate freely, you'll often have governments with registration requirements and whatnot, or other kind of bureaucratic requirements that they won't allow these religious organizations to fulfill or to meet, because they don't meet whatever qualification or requirement they're putting up. But look, what we try to do is lead by example and show through our own efforts that these issues are important, that they don't have anything or should not fear people of faith or people of conscience living in their society. These are their fellow citizens, and we want to make sure that a a government that is treating their citizens fairly is one that we think is going to be a better partner for us, a better trade partner for us, because that's one of the things the president talks a lot about, is Americans being treated fairly, or just treating us fairly in our bilateral relationship, but we also want them to be able to demonstrate that they're able to behave in that way at home as well.
Another interesting example to build on what Deputy Secretary was saying is the Uyghur movement in China. So it was a NED grantee many years ago that was behind the exposure of what the world now knows as a genocide. Again, the Chinese Communist Party was creating a false claim that this was a terrorist threat or a security threat and other nonsense. And it was a NED grantee that documented this, that said, no, here's what's going on. They're going after the Uyghurs because of their faith and because of their unique identity. And now the whole world knows it. So there's power in driving that. There's power in denying the ability for an authoritarian regime to keep its thumb on people. Think about another country that's in the news and has constantly been in the news. That is Cuba. It has been a whole host of a network of NED grantees over the years, and other people, not just NED, but other people of goodwill have been supporting religious standouts, people that are standing up, taking their own initiative, standing for their own freedom. And it's been the great privilege for the National Endowment for Democracy to come alongside and give lift to some of those people that hopefully in a free Cuba will be at the very basis of a transformed society that, you know, I know it feels like I'm talking about, hey, next year in Jerusalem, but feels like Cuba may be changing quickly.
That is super interesting about this transformative aspect that you referred to, because I do think that faith leaders have the ability to really bring about this transformative change in a way that some governments, many will not, right? If we think about faith, it transcends boundaries. It has been, so many faiths have been with us much longer than many countries. And so I think really getting to the heart of this is critical, right? If we have to have stability and growth and peaceful, you know, existence. And really that is what people want at the end of the day. And I was speaking to some people earlier today, you know, they're of Christian faith, but they said really at the end of the day, we want to get along as humans on this planet and to survive. And that is also a priority of the president, right? I mean, going around and seeking peace. We've seen some interventions. There was the intervention in Nigeria and some others which have this focus. But really trying to find stability in a way that's balanced is a challenge, I think.
Well, I think there's an inextricably linked connection here that in the last remaining time we have, I would like to highlight. In my experience as chairman of the board at NED, I've had the great privilege, along with our other board members and senior staff, to meet with any number of prisoners when they get out, and they'll come through and we'll have time to spend with them. And what I have found so interesting and so humbling in listening to these people, many of them are not known as religious people. They're democracy leaders. They're out there on, you know, they're municipal leaders. But they've been jailed. They're a threat to the regime. But when you really talk to them, you find out, at least I've found out, that many, many, many of these people have a deep religious faith, and their prayer life in prison is robust. I mean, it is just a remarkable thing to be able to spend time and listen to them. So I think it's important that we not truncate these things, that we not say, wow, that's a political issue, and that's a religious issue, and that's an economic issue. No. We're covering the whole waterfront here. And all these things relate to one another. And if we're boosting up one that is religious faith and religious freedom and the ability for people to express themselves, then it inures to a far greater tapestry of things that we want to see come into play.
Absolutely. And that intersectionality is so critical, and really understanding, the origin of some of these conflicts, right? Not always just based on religion, based on other things as well. And it's complicated, which could mean that, if we go back to investors, companies, going into a country will be challenging. So it's so important that they understand the context of each of the countries that they go into. Any final thoughts from either of you about the importance of investing, either financially or in other ways, programmatically, in international religious freedom, and why it's so important, before we wrap up?
Well, I think it just makes so much sense. And there's so much power in it, and it can be disproportionately significant, an investment in religious freedom around the world. And it's something that has, it's kind of just getting going in a way, really, if you think about it. And this group in this room has the ability to echo this far and wide. So it's not lost on me, the urgency with which we're communicating today.
Yeah, and I will just finally just add to those remarks and just say, look, religious freedom is foundational. It makes communities better. It makes countries better. And we try to show that by example to all of our partners in the world, people who are friends, people who are allies, people who we have somewhat intermediate relationships with, I guess, that religious freedom is not something to be feared. It is something that I think will just lead to better outcomes across the board for their countries.
So many reasons to invest in religious freedom, and thanks to all of you for investing your time in this panel. And I believe that is it for us and for the rest of the day. Thank you.
For more than 25 years, the International Center for Law and Religion Studies at Brigham Young University has sought to secure freedom of religion or belief for all people in 3 significant ways. First, by expanding knowledge and expertise in the field of law and religion through academic publications, including treatises, books, and articles. A blog, Talk About Law and Religion, sharing scholarly perspectives on current issues, and our daily headline service, a religious freedom toolkit, and other resources. Second, the center facilitates the growth of networks of scholars, policymakers, and other experts in the field through conferences. Our signature annual event, the International Law and Religion Symposium, involving 100 leaders from nearly 50 countries, provides a forum for addressing challenges to freedom of religion or belief worldwide, including 80 other conferences around the world. The center also partners with local and international institutions in 9 countries to conduct training for lawyers, judges, and government officials. Each summer, we gather 15 rising scholars at Oxford for a training course in comparative law and religion. Third, the center is committed to contributing to law reform processes and broader implementation of religious freedom principles worldwide. To date, center leaders have contributed to law reform in 67 countries. By engaging in this work, we are honoring the dignity of each individual, contributing to human flourishing, and building strong and resilient societies. Learn more at iclrs.org.
And now welcome to the stage, from Ukrainian Week, the Chief Rabbi of Ukraine, Rabbi Moshe Azman.
Dear friends, I just came from Ukraine. It's not only that difficult to come here physically because it's a long way and the airport doesn't work in Ukraine. It was difficult to leave the Ukrainian people there in the present time today is very, very cold in Ukraine, and the Russian terrorists, they attack every day. They attack the Ukrainian peaceful cities and the Ukrainian infrastructure by missiles, and people sit in there, tens of thousands of people. In my city, Kiev, and in other cities, they sit in their apartments, in apartment buildings without electricity, without heating system, without water, and I don't know how many people will survive after this winter, because many old people there, and we try to help them what we can. That's why I would like, first of all, to ask you, all of you, to pray for them, for heroic Ukrainian people that's strong, that's under the strong aggression that defend their country and their free world. And I was born in Soviet Union, in Russia, in Leningrad. I was born, and in that time I know personally what is not freedom of religion. Because in that time I was young and was investigated by KGB few times because I become religion, and I had to study. I study in underground yeshiva there, and I study from people that sit in the 10, 20 years of the Stalin time of the prison because there was religions, and that's why it's so important summit here, because Ukraine fight, defend the free of the religion too. And you know, Russia now wants to take Ukraine back to Soviet Union. Russia is officially free of religion, free religion, but I know, I spoke with my colleagues in Russia, and they say because now the government control all what they say, all what they do. I came here, nobody asked me what I'll be touched here. I don't have to say to government. Ukrainian Freedom Country was before the war, and the free country now, and even during the war, because usually when you have a war, it's time, it's not simple time, not free, but Ukrainian people, free people, and that's why I would like to say you that we have to stay with Ukraine. I would like to thank all American people, American government that stay with Ukraine, and all religions that stand and pray for Ukraine, because it's real. I thank God that I have opportunity from the first day of the war, this war, terrible war, to be there to help people. I thank God that put me in the right time and the right place, because then I see by my eyes that we survive, we save people. It's a big I think big present from God to do it, and that's why you know, I have personal tragedy. I lost my son Matatiao in this war. The Russian army killed him, and I have many friends that was killed by Russian. But we, Ukrainian people stand and we'll win. We thank President Trump, thank America that try to do a real peace. And we help to pray that real peace will come. We know that Messiah will come, Mashiach come. There will be a real peace, and all nations will live peacefully. That's why, thank you very much. And I would like to invite all of you now in 5 o'clock. We have here Ukrainian Summit in the International Terrace. Will be now in a few minutes we'll start a summit, interesting and very important summit there, and thank you very much. You're all invited to come here. God bless you.
Joining us on stage, Aram Vardevanyan. Mr. Vardevanyan is a human rights lawyer in Armenia, dedicated to protecting freedom of conscience and belief in his country.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you to the IRF Summit for the opportunity to speak to you today. I come from the Republic of Armenia, my homeland, a great country, a great nation filled with talented and hard-working people. For centuries, our country had an anchor in defending our interests and unifying our people. It was and is the Armenian Apostolic Holy Church. Our nation, throughout its history, has suffered various ordeals: genocide, war, oppression, blockades, and yet never lost its faith. I have to mention that in the year 301, Armenia adopted Christianity as its state religion, thus making us the first Christian nation. The Armenian Apostolic Holy Church has safeguarded our religious, cultural, national identity throughout centuries. And even at the times of the absence of sovereignty or other tough times, the Armenian Apostolic Holy Church has unified Armenians and even acted as the cornerstone for statehood. Now, we have witnessed difficulties these last few years. The 44 days of war in Artsakh, also known as the Nagorno-Karabakh. Also, later on, the forced displacement of 120,000 Armenians. Excuse me. I would like to add that as of now, 120,000 Armenians have been forcefully displaced from their ancestral homes. As of now, as we speak, centuries-old churches and monasteries have been vandalized, denying Christian Armenians the chance to visit places of worship, places which housed saint relics. As we speak, we have 19 Christian Armenians as political prisoners, as captives in Azerbaijan. It is noteworthy that President Trump has raised this issue and made a statement as to the release of prisoners in Baku. What I would like to state is that our Armenian Holy Church has faced various difficulties by foreign states, even oppression and intervention. But what was the unthinkable is that such kind of intervention takes place right now in Armenia by the Armenian leading powers and government. As of now, we have a situation when the leading actors in the executive branch demanded the resignation of the Catholicos, the head of the Armenian Holy Church. Just to imagine the situation, look at it from the perspective of a Catholic leader, of a Catholic country, demanding the resignation of the Roman Pope. As of now, as we speak, 4 bishops of our Armenian Holy Church are detained and continuously detained. 6 bishops of our Armenian Holy Church have been indicted, and bans on their travels and free movement have been imposed. I can state that all these indictments are in gross violations of due process and fundamental human rights. Just imagine, last June, the Armenian Apostolic Church's biggest donor, Mr. Samvel Karapetyan, who I have the honor to represent and to defend as his attorney, was also arrested and detained. The reasoning behind it was the following. A journalist asked a question in regards to the persecution of the Armenian Church, in response to which he answered that he always stood by the Armenian Church and that he will defend the Church, and I quote, "in our way." For these 2 words alone, and based on the public statements by the leading actors in the executive branch, including the Prime Minister, hours later his house was raided, he was arrested and detained for more than 200 days in the harshest conditions possible in the penitentiary institution, also known as the KGB basement. These examples show that the Armenian government weaponized its power against our holy church. That pre-trial detention transformed into a form of punishment, which is unacceptable. And we have the biggest donor of Armenia. We have our holy spiritual leaders as political prisoners in our country. A year ago, Vice President J.D. Vance made a very important statement that we should do more than talk about democratic values, we should live them. This is what I believe is the best formula to solve the situation, to solve the problems in regards to religious freedom, that we should do more than merely talk about them. For 15 years I've been practicing law, and I have never seen such kind of flagrant violations. These violations are neither acceptable nor tolerable. Dear colleagues, I pray that together we will be able to better protect and better promote religious freedom. I pray for the freedom of all those who are unlawfully detained and all those who are persecuted, both in my great country and abroad. And I want to thank the IRF Summit for this opportunity to have this speech in the land of the free and the home of the brave. Thank you so much. God bless you all.